So often, we look at people who seem unshaken by chaos and assume they were just born that way. We tell ourselves some people are naturally calm, and I'm just not one of them. But that's a myth. Calm isn't something you either have or don't have, it's something you cultivate, like a muscle that gets stronger with intentional practice. The truth is, no one is born with an endless well of calm. They build it through daily habits, small choices, and a commitment to self awareness. Think of it like learning to play an instrument. If you sat down at a piano for the first time, you wouldn't expect to master a song immediately. You would understand that skill takes time, patience, and repetition. The same is true for emotional regulation. Staying calm isn't about flipping a switch. It's about training your mind to respond rather than react. It's about rewiring the way you handle stress. So instead of being swept away by every difficult situation, you learn to anchor yourself in steady waters. One of the biggest obstacles to calmness is the belief that our emotions control us. When something stressful happens, we often say, I can't help it, I just get anxious, or that's just how I am. But emotions are like waves. They rise and fall, but they don't define the ocean. Just because you feel overwhelmed doesn't mean you have to act from that place. When we recognize that calmness is a practice, we stop seeing ourselves as powerless victims of our emotions and start seeing ourselves as active participants in our own emotional well-being. The way we train for calmness is by paying attention to our daily habits. Do we start the day with stillness, or do we immediately reach for our phones and flood our minds with noise? Do we take deep breaths when frustration rises, or do we let irritation dictate our actions? The people who seem naturally calm aren't free from stress, they've just built routines that help them manage it. They've learned that true calmness isn't the absence of stress, but the ability to navigate it with intention. Another important piece of practicing calmness is self-compassion. When we expect ourselves to be calm all the time and then fail, we often fall into self-criticism. Why do I always overreact? Why can't I just be more patient? But judgment only makes stress worse. Instead, what if we approached ourselves with kindness? What if we saw every stressful moment as an opportunity to practice a new response rather than a failure? The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. And progress happens one choice at a time. Science backs this up. Studies show that our brains are capable of rewiring based on what we repeatedly do. If we constantly operate from a place of reactivity, our brain strengthens those pathways. But if we practice pausing, breathing, and responding with intention, those pathways become our default instead. This means that every moment of frustration is actually an invitation. Will I react the way I always have? Or will I use this as a chance to strengthen my ability to stay steady? The beauty of making calm a practice is that it spills over into every area of life. When we build this skill, we don't just handle stress better, we improve our relationships, our work, and our overall well-being. A calm mind makes better decisions. It listens more, understands more, and connects more. It's not just about feeling peaceful, it's about showing up in the world as the best version of ourselves. So if you've ever believed that calmness is just something some people are born with, I want you to challenge that thought. You have the power to develop it. It won't happen overnight, but every time you take a deep breath instead of snapping, every time you pause instead of rushing to react, you're strengthening that muscle. And over time, you'll realize that calm isn't just something you admire in others, it's something you embody, something you own, something you've built from the inside out. Have you ever been overwhelmed by emotion and felt like it completely hijacked your ability to think clearly? Maybe you snapped at someone you love, shut down when you needed to speak up, or felt a wave of anxiety that made it impossible to focus. In those moments, it's easy to believe that our emotions are in control, pulling the strings while we simply react. But here's the truth. Emotions lose their power over us the moment we identify them. That's the power of name it to tame it, a simple but profound practice that helps us regulate our emotions instead of being ruled by them. When we name what we're feeling, we engage the rational part of our brain. Neuroscience shows that when we put words to our emotions, when we literally say, I feel anxious or I feel frustrated, we activate the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and problem solving. This reduces activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain that triggers our fight or flight response. In other words, naming our emotions helps us move from a reactive state to a responsive state. It gives us a sense of control rather than feeling like we're drowning in the moment. Think about the last time you felt really stressed. Did you take a second to recognize what was actually happening inside you, or did you just push through, hoping it would pass? Many of us have been conditioned to ignore or suppress our feelings because we think acknowledging them makes us weak. But the opposite is true. And when we don't name what we're feeling, those emotions don't just disappear. They build up, manifesting as tension, irritability, or even physical symptoms like headaches and fatigue. The unspoken feelings don't go away. They just find other ways to be heard. Naming an emotion isn't just about labeling it. It's about understanding it. Sometimes what we think we're feeling on the surface isn't the full story. For example, if you find yourself snapping at a coworker over a minor mistake, the obvious emotion might seem like anger. But if you pause and ask yourself, what's really going on here? You might realize you're actually feeling overwhelmed or insecure. Maybe you're carrying stress from another area of your life, and this situation was just the tipping point. When we take the time to name what we're really feeling, we can address the root issue instead of just reacting to the symptoms. This practice is especially powerful in relationships. When emotions run high, it's easy to fall into blame or defensiveness. But if we pause and name what we're feeling before we respond, we create space for clarity. Instead of saying, you never listen to me, we can say, I feel unheard, and that's making me frustrated. Instead of saying, you always let me down, we can say, I feel disappointed because I had a different expectation. This shift might seem small, but it changes everything. It moves us from attacking the other person to expressing what's happening inside of us. And that's where real connection begins. Children are a great example of why name it to tame it works. A child throwing a tantrum often doesn't even know why they're upset. They just feel overwhelmed and their body reacts. But when a parent helps them put words to their feelings, are you feeling frustrated because you didn't get what you wanted? The child often begins to calm down. The moment the emotion is named, it feels less like an uncontrollable storm and more like something they can understand and navigate. The same is true for adults. We may not throw tantrums, at least not in the same way, but when we name what's happening inside us, we can begin to calm the internal chaos. One of the most powerful things about this practice is that it fosters self-compassion. When we name our emotions, we give ourselves permission to feel them without judgment. Instead of thinking, why am I so anxious? I need to get over it. We can simply acknowledge, I'm feeling anxious right now, and that's okay. This small shift allows us to meet ourselves with kindness instead of criticism. It reminds us that emotions are not something to be ashamed of. They're simply signals trying to tell us something. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, pause, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? Don't rush to fix it or push it away. Just name it. Whether it's fear, sadness, frustration, or uncertainty, speak it out loud or write it down. You'll be surprised at how much power this simple act holds. Because when we name our emotions, we don't just tame them, we take back control. We move from reacting to responding, from confusion to clarity, and from being at the mercy of our feelings to understanding them with strength and grace. How many times have you said something in the heat of the moment and regretted it later? How often have you fired off an angry text, slammed a door, or let frustration dictate your actions, only to realize afterward that you wish you had handled it differently? We've all been there. Reacting is easy, it's instinctive, but responding with wisdom, that requires a pause. That small moment between stimulus and reaction holds incredible power. It's the difference between making a situation worse and making it better. between deepening a relationship and damaging it, between regret and resilience. The problem is that our brains are wired for quick reactions. When we perceive a threat, whether it's physical danger or an emotional trigger, our nervous system jumps into action. Our heart rate increases, our breath shortens, and our brain floods with stress hormones, preparing us to fight, flee, or freeze. This response was essential for our ancestors who faced life or death situations. But in everyday life, it often does more harm than good. Most of the time, we're not in real danger. We're just overwhelmed, irritated, or hurt. And if we act from that reactive state, we usually end up saying or doing something we don't truly mean. A pause, even just a few seconds long, interrupts this automatic reaction. It allows the rational part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, to catch up with the emotional brain. Instead of acting on impulse, we can take a step back, assess the situation, and choose a response that aligns with who we want to be. This doesn't mean suppressing our emotions or pretending we don't feel frustrated, disappointed, or hurt. It simply means creating enough space to decide how we want to express those emotions in a way that leads to resolution rather than regret. One of the most effective ways to practice this pause is through breath work. When emotions rise, so does our heart rate, and our breath becomes shallow. Taking a slow, deep breath, counting to 4 on the inhale, holding for 4 seconds, and exhaling for 4, signals to the brain that we are safe. It calms the nervous system and gives us a moment to regain control. It's a small action with a big impact. The next time you feel yourself on the verge of snapping at someone or reacting impulsively, take that breath first. You might be surprised how much clarity comes in just a few seconds. Another powerful tool is self-awareness. The more we understand our emotional triggers, the easier it becomes to pause before reacting. If we know that criticism makes us defensive, that being ignored makes us angry, or that feeling overwhelmed makes us impatient, we can catch those patterns in real time. Instead of being controlled by our triggers, we can name them, acknowledge them, and decide how we want to handle them. The goal isn't to eliminate strong emotions. Is to create enough space between the feeling and the action so that we stay in control of how we show up. Pausing before reacting isn't just about managing conflict. It's about deepening our relationships. Whether with family, friends, or colleagues, the way we respond to difficult moments shapes the trust and connection we build. Think about the last time someone upset you. If you had taken a moment before reacting, how might the conversation have gone differently? Would you have chosen different words? Would you have listened more before speaking? In that pause, we have the power to shift the entire dynamic of a conversation, replacing defensiveness with understanding and reactivity with intention. This practice isn't just for moments of anger or frustration. It applies to excitement and enthusiasm too. Sometimes in our eagerness, we rush to respond, to offer advice, or to fix things before fully understanding the situation. But a pause allows us to listen more deeply, to ask better questions, and to ensure that our response truly serves the moment. It teaches us patience. It reminds us that we don't always have to be the first to speak or the quickest to act. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do is simply wait. So the next time you feel that surge of emotion rising, whether it's anger, frustration, or even overwhelming excitement, pause, take a breath, give yourself the gift of a moment. Because in that small space between impulse and action lies the power to change everything. And the more we practice it, the more we become people who don't just react to life, but who respond with wisdom, grace, and clarity. Life has a way of throwing storms our way. Stress, uncertainty, conflict, fear, these waves come crashing in, often when we least expect them. And in those moments, it's easy to feel untethered, like we're being swept away by emotions beyond our control. But what if I told you that you already have everything you need to anchor yourself, to steady your mind and body, even when chaos surrounds you? That anchor is your breath. It's always with you, always accessible, and always ready to bring you back to the present moment if you choose to use it. Breathing is something we do automatically, but most of us don't do it intentionally. When we're stressed or anxious, our breath becomes shallow and rapid. This sends a signal to the brain that we are in danger, activating the body's fight or flight response. Our heart beats faster, our muscles tense, and our thoughts start racing. But here's the powerful part. We can reverse this process simply by changing the way we breathe. By slowing down our breath, we send a message back to the brain that we are safe. And when the brain believes we are safe, it shifts the entire body into a state of calm. Think about the last time you felt overwhelmed. Maybe it was an argument with a loved one, a stressful deadline at work, or a moment of unexpected bad news. What did your breath feel like? Chances are it was tight, shallow, and fast. Now imagine that in that very moment, you had paused and taken a slow, deep breath. Imagine inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, and exhaling for 4. Wouldn't that small act have created just a little more space, a little more steadiness? That's the power of using your breath as an anchor. It doesn't erase the storm, but it gives you something solid to hold on to while it passes. Science backs this up. Studies show that deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural rest and digest mode. It lowers blood pressure, slows the heart rate, and reduces levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. In other words, breath work isn't just a spiritual or meditative practice. It's a physiological tool that can literally rewire how we respond to stress. And the best part, it's free, always available, and requires no special equipment or training. One of the most powerful breathing techniques is called box breathing, used by everyone from Navy SEALs to therapists. It's simple. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and hold again for 4 seconds before repeating. This method slows the mind, steadies the nervous system, and brings us back to the present. Another technique, the 4-4-7-8 breath, involves inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 7, and exhaling for 8. This longer exhale helps release tension and signals deep relaxation. The key isn't which method you choose, it's that you make breathing with intention a habit. Breathing isn't just a tool for managing stress, it's also a way to increase mindfulness. When we focus on our breath, we pull ourselves out of the spiral of overthinking and into the now. So much of our anxiety lives in the what ifs, the future we can't control, the past we can't change. But the breath is always here, right now. It's the simplest and most effective way to ground yourself in the present, to remind yourself that in this moment you are safe. This practice also helps in moments of emotional intensity. Instead of reacting out of anger, fear, or frustration, we can train ourselves to breathe first, respond second. Imagine how many arguments could be avoided, how many regrets could be spared if we simply paused and took a breath before speaking. That small moment of oxygen creates space for clarity, for wisdom, for choosing words that heal instead of words that wound. Your breath is also an incredible tool for building resilience. Life will always bring stress, but the difference between those who crumble under it and those who rise above it often comes down to emotional regulation. And emotional regulation starts with the breath. The more you practice anchoring yourself through breath work, the more naturally calm becomes your default state. It becomes easier to face challenges without being overwhelmed, to sit with discomfort without panicking, and to navigate uncertainty without losing your center. Many of us search for external solutions to inner chaos. We look for distraction, validation, or control over situations outside ourselves. But the real solution is within. Your breath is the one thing no one can take from you, the one constant in a world of unpredictability. When everything else feels uncertain, when the waves of life crash against you, your breath is the steady ground beneath your feet. So the next time you feel lost, scattered, or overwhelmed, return to the simplest thing. Inhale, exhale. Let your breath remind you that no matter what is happening around you, you can find stillness within. Because calm isn't found in the absence of storms, it's found in learning how to anchor yourself through them. And your breath is the most powerful anchor you will ever have. When life knocks us down, and it inevitably will, what determines whether we rise again isn't just grit or toughness. It's not about pushing through pain with sheer willpower or pretending we're unaffected by hardship. True resilience doesn't come from being unbreakable. It comes from how we treat ourselves in the moments we feel broken. And at the heart of resilience is self-compassion. The ability to offer ourselves the same kindness, understanding, and grace that we would extend to someone we love. Many of us have been taught that resilience means being strong, that it's about toughening up, not showing weakness and pushing forward no matter what. But this mindset often backfires. When we ignore our struggles, dismiss our pain, or shame ourselves for feeling overwhelmed, we don't build strength, we build emotional exhaustion. Resilience isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about acknowledging them without letting them define us. And self-compassion is what allows us to do that. It gives us permission to be human, to struggle, and to move forward without self-judgment. Think about how you respond to a friend who's going through a tough time. You probably don't say, "You should be over this by now," or "You're such a failure for feeling this way." Instead, you offer support, reassurance, and patience. But how often do you extend that same kindness to yourself? Too often when we face setbacks, we become our own harshest critics. We tell ourselves we should be stronger, smarter, or more capable, but resilience isn't built through self-criticism, it's built through self-compassion. When we meet ourselves with kindness, we create an internal environment that fosters healing rather than deepening wounds. Self-compassion isn't about making excuses or avoiding accountability. It's about recognizing that failure, struggle, and setbacks are part of the human experience. When we understand this, we stop seeing our hardships as personal failures and start seeing them as opportunities for growth. Instead of thinking, "I'm not good enough," we can shift to, "This is hard, but I am learning." Instead of, "I'll never get through this," we remind ourselves, "I have survived difficult things before, and I will survive this too." These small shifts in perspective change the way we navigate challenges. Research shows that self-compassionate people are actually more resilient than those who are self-critical. Studies have found that individuals who practice self-compassion have lower levels of anxiety, depression, and burnout. This is because self-compassion reduces the stress response in the brain. When we berate ourselves, our nervous system goes into fight or flight mode, making it harder to think clearly and move forward. But when we offer ourselves compassion, we activate the part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation, allowing us to process our emotions in a healthier way. One of the most powerful ways to build resilience through self-compassion is by changing the way we talk to ourselves. When we face a setback, we can ask, "How would I speak to a friend in this situation?" If we wouldn't say something to a loved one, we shouldn't say it to ourselves. Practicing self-compassionate self-talk helps us reframe challenges. Instead of saying, "I'm so bad at this," we can say, "I'm learning and every step forward counts." Instead of, "I always mess things up," we remind ourselves, "I made a mistake, but that doesn't define me." Over time, these small changes create a mindset that supports resilience rather than undermining it. Another key aspect of self-compassion is allowing ourselves to rest. In a culture that glorifies hustle and productivity, it's easy to believe that slowing down is a sign of weakness. But true resilience requires rest and recovery. When we push ourselves beyond our limits without giving ourselves grace, we don't become stronger, we burn out. Rest isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Giving ourselves permission to pause, to breathe, to take care of our needs is an act of self-compassion that ultimately fuels our ability to keep going. Self-compassion also strengthens our relationships. When we are kind to ourselves, we become more understanding and patient with others. When we stop holding ourselves to impossible standards, we stop doing the same to those around us. This creates deeper connections, builds trust, and allows us to navigate challenges in relationships with greater empathy. Resilience isn't just about how we handle personal struggles. It's about how we show up for others. And that starts with how we show up for ourselves. It's easy to think that self-compassion is something we practice only when life is hard, but the truth is, it's a daily habit. The way we talk to ourselves, the grace we give ourselves in small moments, the patience we extend when things don't go as planned, these are the building blocks of resilience. And the more we practice self-compassion, the more naturally it becomes our default response when we face difficulties. So if you want to build resilience, start by being kind to yourself. Offer yourself grace when you fall. Remind yourself that struggle is part of being human. Speak to yourself with the same kindness you would give to someone you love. Because resilience isn't about being perfect, it's about being patient with yourself as you grow. And the more compassion you offer yourself, the stronger you will become, not because you never fall, but because you always rise again.